"I'm in love with your best friend," said the billionaire CEO, and he left her. 3 years later, he saw her with triplets. The charity park hummed with quiet energy, soft music drifting across the lawn, children racing between white tents, volunteers handing out lemonade beneath wide trees. Nolan Casper adjusted the cuff of his jacket as cameras flashed somewhere behind him. Events like this used to feel effortless. Today, he felt strangely distracted, as if he had walked into a memory he hadn't agreed to revisit. A burst of laughter pulled his attention toward the open grass. 3 small children ran in uneven circles, their shoes tapping against the stone path. One carried a paper windmill that spun wildly in the breeze. Another chased a stray balloon. The smallest held onto a woman's hand, trying to keep pace. Nolan's steps slowed. He recognized the way she tilted her head when she laughed, gentle, unguarded. Beverly Smith stood near the edge of the crowd, sunlight brushing across her hair as she knelt to straighten a tiny jacket. For a moment, sound faded around him. "Hi, Nolan," she said when she noticed him, her voice calm, like they had spoken yesterday instead of years ago. The children glanced up curiously. He opened his mouth, but words came late. "Beverly." The tallest child tugged her sleeve. "Mom, is this your friend?" "Friend." The word lingered longer than it should have. A warm breeze moved through the park, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant coffee. Nolan watched as one of the children, a boy with curious eyes, offered him a shy wave before running back toward the others. Beverly crouched down, tying a loose shoelace with steady hands. She looked peaceful in a way he didn't remember, not untouched by life but grounded by it. "These are yours?" he asked gently. She nodded. Wilder, Amias, and Renly. The names felt unfamiliar in his tongue, yet they carried weight. The children circled her, laughing without hesitation, completely certain she would always be there when they turned around. Nolan swallowed, unsure whether to step closer or stay where he stood. A volunteer passed by, greeting him with recognition, but he barely noticed. All he could see was Beverly brushing grass from her skirt while one of the kids tugged her toward a game booth. "You look surprised," she said softly. "I missed a lot," he replied. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the children run toward a ring toss stand, her eyes warm, steady. The quiet between them held more meaning than any speech he could give. Somewhere nearby, applause rose from the small stage, but Nolan felt as if he had stepped outside time. Standing beside her felt familiar and foreign at once. He remembered long conversations that used to stretch past midnight, the calm way she listened when everyone else rushed to speak. "I wasn't sure I'd see you here," he admitted. "It's for a good cause," Beverly said, and the kids wanted to help. Renly, the youngest, returned holding a small painted rock and pressed it into Beverly's hand. She laughed, the sound light but real, and Nolan felt a quiet ache he hadn't expected. He thought of the version of himself who had chosen work over presence, logic over emotion. At the time, leaving had felt responsible, almost noble. Now, watching Beverly brush dirt from a child's cheek, that decision felt heavier. "You look happy," he said carefully. She met his eyes. "I am." No accusation, no resentment, just honesty. Nolan shifted his weight, hands sliding into his pockets. The empire he had built stood tall, admired by thousands. Yet standing here, he felt smaller than he ever had inside a boardroom. He wondered if success always came with a silent cost, or if he had simply misread what mattered most. The children called for Beverly again, pulling her away for a moment. Nolan watched her run toward them, her laughter blending with theirs, and realized how much life had continued without him. Have you ever walked away from someone believing it was the right thing, only to realize later that you had misunderstood what they truly needed? Nolan rested his hands on the railing near the pond while Beverly helped Wilder adjust a tiny paper crown. Watching her move through the crowd with calm confidence stirred something he hadn't felt in years. "I didn't expect to see you again like this," he said when she returned. "Life doesn't always wait for perfect timing," she replied. Her words lingered. "If you've ever thought you were protecting someone by stepping aside, did it actually help them? Or did it just leave a space no one knew how to fill?" Nolan glanced toward the children again. They ran back toward Beverly without hesitation, their trust effortless. He realized he had once been that safe place for her, and he had walked away from it. "Can we talk later?" Nolan asked quietly. Beverly hesitated for a second, then nodded. "We can sit after the kids finish the scavenger hunt." The promise of a conversation hung between them, unspoken questions waiting beneath the surface. Nolan turned toward the camera path where a few attendees recognized him, offering polite smiles. He paused, then faced forward again, voice softer, not rehearsed, just honest. "Sometimes you think you understand your own story," he said, until life brings someone back who reminds you of the chapter you skipped. If you're new here, welcome to Mr. Cooper Stories. And if you've been part of this journey before, you already know. Some choices don't end when we think they do. If this moment makes you curious, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this only continue because you're here listening, sharing, and reflecting. Nolan watched Beverly from a distance as the children waved colorful ribbons through the air. He knew the reunion was only the beginning. There were truths still buried in the past, a confession that broke 3 lives, a goodbye spoken too calmly, and years of silence that changed everything. He drew a slow breath. Because to understand how a billionaire ended up standing in a park, wondering if he had lost the one person who truly saw him, we have to go back to the moment everything began. 3 years before the park reunion, Nolan Casper stepped into the executive floor of Casper & Company with the quiet confidence people expected from him. The glass conference room overlooked the city stretching into the distance, its long table filled with designers, strategists, and executives who rose almost instantly when he entered. Chairs shifted. Tablets clicked shut. A low murmur faded into respectful silence. Everyone stood, except one person. At the far end of the table, Beverly Smith leaned over a spread of color samples, deep in conversation with Sheila Gottlieb. Her pencil tapped lightly against a sketch as she compared 2 shades of blue. "Sheila, if we soften the edge here, it feels more human," Beverly said, barely glancing up. Sheila noticed Nolan first and nudged her friend gently. Beverly blinked, then looked toward the door. Realization crossed her face, followed by a quick, apologetic smile. She rose, smoothing her notebook against her chest. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Casper." "Nolan," he corrected, voice calm rather than commanding. Something about the way she nodded, simple, unperformed, lingered with him longer than expected. Most people rehearsed their reactions around him, choosing their words carefully as if standing in front of a mirror. Beverly returned to her seat without trying to impress him. That alone felt unusual. As the meeting began, Nolan noticed how she listened more than she spoke, yet when she finally shared an idea, the room shifted toward her naturally. "We keep talking about innovation," she said quietly, sliding a sketch toward the center. "But innovation only works when people feel invited into it." The sentence wasn't dramatic, yet it held clarity. Nolan leaned back slightly, studying her. She didn't watch him for approval. She focused on the work, and for the first time that morning, he felt curious. After the presentation ended, employees gathered their things quickly, eager to return to deadlines. Sheila lingered beside Nolan, her expression bright with ambition. "What did you think?" she asked. "You've built a strong team," he replied. Sheila's smile widened. "Beverly's been my secret weapon." Across the room, Beverly packed her sketches carefully, unaware of the conversation. She tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear and laughed softly at something another designer said. Nolan noticed how different her energy felt compared to the usual corporate rhythm. She moved without urgency, as if she trusted time to unfold rather than chasing it. "She doesn't seem intimidated," he said. "She isn't," Sheila replied. "That's why she's good." Later, as people filtered out, Beverly approached with a small notebook in hand. "I hope my comments weren't too direct," she said. "Direct is useful," Nolan answered. "Most people try too hard to sound impressive." Her smile tilted slightly. "I just try to make things clearer." The simplicity of her response surprised him. No flattery, no nervousness. When she walked away, Nolan found himself watching the way she paused near the window, studying the city below like it was an unfinished painting. Sheila Gottlieb moved through the office with effortless authority. She and Nolan had built a relationship grounded in shared goals, long strategy sessions, industry events, conversations about growth that stretched late into the night. They were admired enough that people rarely questioned the stability of their partnership. One afternoon, Sheila invited Nolan to join her team for lunch in the design lounge. "You need to see how the creative side thinks," she teased. The room buzzed with relaxed conversation, nothing like the formal energy of executive meetings. Beverly sat cross-legged on a sofa, sketchbook balanced on her knees while she listened to a colleague describe a failed concept. Nolan took a seat beside Sheila, watching quietly. "What are you working on?" he asked Beverly. She turned the sketchbook toward him without hesitation. "Just experimenting. Nothing official." The drawing showed soft curves, warm tones, a sense of calm rather than bold innovation. "It feels grounded," he said. "That's the goal," she replied. "People don't always want to be impressed. Sometimes they want to feel understood." Her words lingered long after the conversation moved on. Nolan glanced at Sheila, who was laughing with another designer, completely at ease. For the first time, he realized how different Beverly's perspective felt from the world he lived in, a world measured by results and expansion. Over the following weeks, Nolan noticed Beverly in passing more often than he expected. She held elevator doors for interns who looked nervous during their first week. She left handwritten notes beside finished prototypes, thanking teammates for details most executives overlooked. She asked questions that shifted conversations without demanding attention. One evening, Nolan passed the design studio long after most lights had dimmed. Beverly sat near the window with headphones around her neck, reviewing color palettes under a desk lamp. "You're still here?" he asked. She glanced up, surprised but not uncomfortable. "I lose track of time when something almost works." He stepped closer, studying the screen. "What makes it almost?" She pointed gently. "Right now it feels cold. I'm trying to find warmth without making it obvious." Nolan considered her words. Warmth without forcing it. The idea felt strangely personal. "You see details other people miss," he said. "I think everyone sees them," she replied. "Some just don't slow down enough to notice." Her response settled quietly in his mind. Most conversations in his world moved fast, decisive, efficient. Beverly spoke like someone unafraid of stillness. When he left the studio that night, he realized he felt lighter than he had after any boardroom victory. Sheila and Nolan continued to appear together at industry gatherings, their partnership polished and admired. Yet Nolan found himself noticing when Beverly entered a room, not with urgency, but with quiet awareness. During one late project review, Beverly disagreed with a marketing proposal that everyone else had already approved. "I think this direction might feel distant to our audience," she said gently. A few executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to challenge her. Nolan leaned forward. "Explain," he encouraged. She didn't rush. She described how small design choices could influence emotion, how people responded to authenticity more than spectacle. As she spoke, Nolan realized he trusted her perspective instinctively. She wasn't trying to win an argument. She wanted the work to mean something. After the meeting, Sheila wrapped an arm around his shoulder. "You look impressed." "I am," he admitted. Sheila laughed. "Careful, Beverly has a way of making people rethink everything." The comment sounded lighthearted, but Nolan felt something shift inside him, admiration deepening into a curiosity he couldn't fully name. One afternoon, rain tapped softly against the office windows while the design team prepared for a presentation. Beverly stood near the whiteboard, erasing a line and redrawing it with steady hands. Nolan lingered by the doorway longer than necessary, watching how she approached each detail with patience. When she noticed him, she smiled. "You're early. I wanted to see the process," he said. She handed him a marker. "Then help me decide, this curve or this one." The question felt disarming. Few people invited him into their creative space without hesitation. He studied the board carefully before answering. "The second one feels calmer." She nodded. "That's what I thought too." For a moment, they stood side by side in comfortable silence. "You don't treat me like a title," he said quietly. Beverly shrugged lightly. "Titles change. People don't." The simplicity of her words stayed with him long after he left the room. As Nolan walked back toward his office, he realized something had begun without announcement. A quiet shift in how he looked at her, in how he listened when she spoke. He didn't call it love, not yet. But admiration had crossed a line he couldn't quite define, and somewhere beneath the surface a new chapter had started to take shape, one that would eventually change all three of their lives. The creative floor of Casper and Company changed after sunset. Conversations softened, keyboards slowed, and the rush of daytime decisions gave way to quiet focus. Nolan rarely stayed past evening meetings, yet during the early stages of a major campaign, he found himself returning more often. Sheila thrived in the pressure of deadlines. She moved between teams with sharp efficiency, balancing calls and presentations, while still managing to laugh at small mishaps along the way. Beverly stayed longer than most, not out of obligation, but because she liked watching ideas settle into something real. One night, Nolan walked through the design studio and found the two women leaning over a large board filled with sketches. "Sheila wants bold," Beverly said lightly. "I want honest." Sheila nudged her playfully. "And Nolan wants results." Nolan leaned against the table. "Results matter," he said, "but so does how we get there." Beverly glanced at him with a small smile, as if she appreciated that answer more than he expected. The three of them fell into an easy rhythm during those weeks, work conversations blending into quiet jokes, shared takeout dinners replacing formal lunches. Nothing felt out of place, yet Nolan noticed he lingered longer when Beverly joined the discussion. As the project grew, Sheila's schedule filled with travel and late-night calls. She handled the pressure with confidence, yet it meant Nolan and Beverly crossed paths more often during working hours. One afternoon, Sheila rushed into the studio with her coat already on. "I've got to head to a client." "Dinner," she said. "You two keep refining the concept, okay?" Beverly nodded. "We'll send updates." Nolan watched Sheila leave, then turned back toward the sketches. The room felt quieter without her energy. Not empty, just calmer. "You don't enjoy the spotlight much, do you?" he asked Beverly. She shook her head. "I like building things people don't notice right away." He studied her thoughtful expression. You make complicated ideas feel simple. She smiled faintly. That's the goal. Their conversations stayed, focused on work, yet there was a growing comfort between them that didn't need explanation. Nolan found himself asking her opinions before finalizing decisions, trusting her instinct even when it challenged his own. A steady rain fell across the city one evening as Nolan finished a late call. He glanced at his phone, a message from Sheila explaining she had been pulled into another meeting and couldn't make their dinner reservation. He hesitated before walking toward the design floor. Beverly sat near the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass while she packed her bag. Plans changed? She asked gently. Looks like it, he replied. There was a pause, then she shrugged lightly. There's a small diner down the street. Nothing fancy, but it stays open late. He surprised himself by agreeing. The diner felt warm and unhurried. Soft music, low lighting, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. They sat across from each other, menus resting untouched between them. This feels accidental, Beverly said, tracing the rim of her cup. Maybe, Nolan answered. But it feels easy. She laughed softly. Easy isn't a word people usually use around you. He leaned back, considering that. Maybe I just don't let them see that side. They talked about childhood memories, hers filled with quiet creativity, his shaped by expectations and responsibility. The conversation moved without effort, neither of them trying to impress the other. You don't look at me like everyone else, he said at one point. She tilted her head. Maybe I just see the person first. Her words stayed with him long after the plates were cleared. After that night, Nolan noticed how often he waited for Beverly's presence during meetings. He told himself it was professional. She asked thoughtful questions, noticed details others overlooked. During a brainstorming session, Beverly passed him a note with a quick sketch and a single sentence. What if success felt quieter? He read it twice before looking up. She didn't wait for his reaction. She simply continued listening to the team. Later in the hallway, he stopped her. What did you mean by that? She shrugged gently. Sometimes growth doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. The simplicity of her perspective unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. He had spent years chasing expansion, measuring progress through numbers and milestones. Beverly spoke about balance as if it were a natural part of ambition. And slowly, admiration began shifting into something deeper, a connection built on conversations that felt honest instead of strategic. Sheila trusted both of them completely. She joked about how well they worked together, often teasing Nolan about finally listening to a designer instead of an investor. One evening, the three of them shared dinner after a long presentation. Sheila described her latest plans for expansion, while Beverly listened quietly, occasionally offering thoughtful suggestions. You two are becoming a dangerous team, Sheila said with a laugh. Nolan smiled, but something inside him felt uneasy, not because of anything Beverly had done, but because of how natural their conversations felt when they were alone. Later that night, as Sheila stepped away to take a call, Beverly looked at Nolan across the table. You care about her a lot, she said softly. I do, he replied. And she trusts you, Beverly added. The words carried weight. Nolan nodded, unsure why a quiet tension settled between them in that moment. Weeks passed, filled with deadlines and small victories. Nolan told himself everything remained the same. Sheila was still his partner, Beverly was still part of the team. Yet he noticed how the room felt lighter when Beverly walked in. He found himself listening for her laugh during group conversations, watching how she encouraged others without taking credit. One evening, as the team wrapped up a successful launch, Beverly handed Nolan a small envelope. What's this? He asked. A thank you note, she said, for trusting us. Inside was a simple sketch, a design concept shaped like two overlapping circles. It represents collaboration, she explained. Nothing works alone. He folded the paper carefully, more moved than he expected. Walking back toward his office, Nolan realized he looked forward to seeing her in ways that went beyond admiration. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't even fully admit it to himself. But somewhere between late-night conversations and quiet moments over coffee, he had begun to feel something he couldn't easily define. One evening after a long meeting, Nolan and Beverly stood by the elevator, waiting for the doors to open. The building felt unusually quiet, the city lights glowing faintly beyond the windows. You seem thoughtful tonight, she said. I've been thinking about choices, he replied. She studied him carefully. Are they good choices? I'm not sure yet. The elevator arrived, but neither of them moved immediately. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about right or wrong, she said gently. They're about timing. The words settled between them as they stepped inside. As the doors closed, Nolan realized something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change the direction of everything that followed. And though neither of them spoke about it then, That quiet connection would eventually lead to a confession neither of them was prepared to face. Winter arrived quietly, settling over the city with pale morning light and longer evenings. Inside Nolan's penthouse, the world felt unusually still. He stood near the window, watching distant traffic move in slow lines while he tried to rehearse words that refused to feel right. Sheila arrived a few minutes later, brushing snow from her coat as she stepped inside. "You sounded serious on the phone," she said, setting her bag down. "What's going on?" Nolan hesitated. Conversations with investors and partners had always come easily to him. This felt different, heavier, more personal than anything he had faced before. "We need to talk," he said gently. Sheila studied him, sensing the shift in his tone. She sat across from him, her posture calm but attentive. "You're making me nervous," she admitted. He exhaled slowly, realizing there was no perfect way to begin. "I've been trying to understand something," Nolan said, voice low, "and I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel it." Sheila's expression softened slightly. "Then don't pretend." The honesty she offered made the moment harder. "I'm in love with your best friend." The words landed between them with quiet weight. Sheila didn't react immediately. She looked down at her hands, fingers laced together, as if giving herself time to absorb what he had said. "When did you realize?" she asked at last. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he replied. "I tried to ignore it." She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful rather than angry. "She trusts me," Sheila said after a long pause. "We both did." "I know," Nolan answered. "That's why I had to tell you before anything changed further." Sheila looked up at him then, searching his face for something, reassurance maybe or clarity. "And what happens now?" she asked. He didn't have a perfect answer. The conversation stretched into the evening, filled with long pauses and careful honesty. Sheila didn't accuse him or demand explanations. Instead, she asked quiet questions about timing, about intention, about whether he had truly thought through the consequences. "I always believed we understood each other," she said gently. "We do," Nolan replied. "That hasn't changed. But something else has," she said. They both knew it. Sheila stood and walked toward the window, watching snow drift past glass. "I can't stay in something that already belongs somewhere else," she said softly. Nolan nodded, unable to argue. The respect between them remained, even as their relationship shifted into something unrecognizable. When she turned back, her eyes held sadness, but also strength. "I hope you're right about her," she said. "Because this isn't a small decision." Neither of them raised their voices. They simply accepted that the version of their life they had built together had come to an end. The following week felt different at Casper, and company conversations stayed polite, yet an invisible distance settled into the air. Sheila focused on her work with the same determination as always, but Nolan noticed she spent more time with other teams, keeping interactions brief. Beverly sensed the change immediately. "Did something happen?" she asked Sheila one afternoon. Her voice didn't rise. That restraint hurt more than any argument could have. Sheila hesitated before answering. "You should talk to Nolan." The words left Beverly unsettled. Later that day, she knocked softly on Nolan's office door. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. He gestured toward a chair. "There's something I need to tell you." Her expression grew cautious. "What is it?" He explained the conversation with Sheila, not dramatically, just honestly. He described how long he had tried to understand his feelings and how he didn't want to move forward without clarity. Beverly listened without interrupting, her hands resting quietly in her lap. When he finished, she didn't smile. She didn't react with excitement. Instead, her eyes filled with quiet sadness. "You were my safe place," she said softly. She was too... Nolan felt the weight of her words immediately. "I never wanted to hurt her," Beverly continued. "Or you." "I know," he said. She looked down for a moment, gathering herself. "This doesn't feel like a beginning," she admitted. "It feels like something ending." Over the next few weeks, Beverly kept her distance from both of them. She focused on work, arriving early and leaving late, avoiding conversations that felt too personal. One afternoon, Nolan found her alone in the studio adjusting a display board. "Can we talk?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I don't expect anything from you," he said gently. "I just wanted you to know the truth." She studied him carefully. "Truth doesn't make things easier," she replied. "It just makes them real." He didn't argue. "I need time," she added. "Not because I don't care, but because caring changed everything." Nolan understood. For the first time in years, he found himself waiting, not for a business outcome, but for a person to decide if he still belonged in her life. Time softened the immediate tension, but the friendship between Beverly and Sheila felt fragile. They spoke politely at work, sharing updates without the easy laughter that once defined them. One evening, Sheila approached Beverly near the break room. "I don't blame you," she said quietly. Beverly looked surprised. "It still feels like I hurt you." "You didn't choose this alone," Sheila replied. "None of us did." The conversation didn't fix everything, yet it opened a small door toward healing. Nolan watched from a distance, realizing how much had shifted because of a single confession. He had told the truth, believing honesty would bring clarity. Instead, it had created a space where every relationship needed to rebuild itself slowly. And as winter gave way to early spring, the three of them stood at the edge of something new, uncertain, complicated, but undeniably real. The confession had ended one chapter. What came next would depend on patience, trust, and whether love could grow without rushing ahead of the wounds it had created. Spring arrived quietly, softening the air outside Casper and Company, and bringing longer afternoons that felt less rushed. Nolan didn't try to force conversations with Beverly after the confession. He understood that rushing forward would only make things heavier. Instead, he gave her space. They crossed paths during meetings and shared brief, polite exchanges. Nothing more. The absence of their easy conversations felt noticeable, yet Nolan respected the distance she needed. One afternoon, he found a small envelope on his desk. Inside was a note written in Beverly's neat handwriting. No promises, no expectations, just honesty. He smiled faintly, folding the paper carefully before placing it back inside the envelope. It wasn't a beginning, but it wasn't an ending either. A few days later, Beverly approached him after a team review. "Would you like to walk?" she asked quietly. The invitation felt simple, yet it carried weight. Nolan nodded, matching her calm pace as they stepped outside. They didn't talk about feelings right away. They spoke about work, about books, about how strange it felt to see the park blooming again after winter. The conversation moved gently, as if both of them were learning how to stand in the same space without pressure. For Nolan, patience felt unfamiliar and unexpectedly peaceful. Their walks became a quiet routine. Sometimes they met after work, strolling through tree-lined paths where city noise softened into distant echoes. One evening, they paused near a small pond where sunlight reflected off the water. "If this is real," Beverly said carefully, "it has to grow quietly." Nolan nodded. "I'm not in a hurry." She studied him, as if measuring whether he meant it. "I don't want to replace anything," she added. "What happened with Sheila still matters to me." "It matters to me too," he replied. The honesty between them felt steady rather than dramatic. They talked about ordinary things, favorite childhood memories, small mistakes that shaped who they had become. Nolan found himself sharing stories he rarely told anyone, stories that had nothing to do with business or success. Beverly listened the way she always had, with attention that made him feel understood rather than evaluated. As they continued walking, he realized something new about himself. He didn't need grand gestures to feel connected. He only needed time. At work, their interactions stayed professional. Beverly made it clear that whatever was growing between them needed to exist outside office expectations. "No shortcuts," she reminded him one afternoon as they left a meeting together. "We take this slowly, or we don't take it at all." He respected that boundary. They met for coffee instead of formal dinners, choosing small places where conversations felt natural. Nolan learned how she noticed details most people ignored, the way a barista remembered regular customers, the way sunlight changed the color of a mural depending on the hour. "You pay attention to things that don't seem important," he told her once. She smiled. "Those are usually the things that last." Her perspective shifted how he approached even his work. He found himself asking different questions during meetings, focusing less on expansion and more on meaning. The change didn't happen overnight, but Beverly's influence made him consider a version of success that felt calmer. One evening, they sat on a bench overlooking a quiet stretch of grass. Families walked past, children chasing kites while the sky turned a soft shade of gold. Nolan leaned back, hands resting on the bench. "I used to think slowing down meant losing momentum," he admitted. "And now?" Beverly asked. "Now it feels like breathing," he said. She laughed softly at that. They watched a group of musicians setting up nearby, their instruments catching the fading light. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward. "I don't want this to feel like a secret," Beverly said eventually. "But I also don't want it to be loud." "It won't be," Nolan promised. He meant it. With her, he didn't feel like a billionaire trying to prove something. He felt like someone discovering a different way of living, one built on presence instead of constant movement. Weeks passed, and their connection deepened through ordinary moments rather than grand declarations. Nolan learned how Beverly preferred quiet cafes to crowded events, how she found inspiration in small details others overlooked. One evening as they walked through the park again, she paused and turned toward him. "I'm not afraid of caring about you," she said gently. "I'm just afraid of losing myself in the process." "You won't," he replied. "I don't want you to change for me." Her expression softened at his answer. For the first time since everything had shifted, she reached for his hand. The gesture felt simple, yet it carried a sense of trust that had taken time to rebuild. They continued walking, their steps unhurried. There were no dramatic promises, no declarations meant to impress anyone watching. Just two people choosing to move forward carefully, learning how to build something new without erasing what came before. And in that quiet beginning, Nolan felt a kind of peace he had never experienced, a stillness that made ambition feel less urgent and connection feel more real. He didn't know yet how fragile that balance would become. But for a while, walking beside Beverly under the soft glow of evening lights, he believed that love could grow without pressure, slowly, steadily, exactly the way she had asked. The months that followed brought rapid expansion for Casper and company. New partnerships formed, international meetings filled Nolan's calendar, and opportunities arrived faster than he could comfortably manage. At first, he tried to balance everything: morning calls with investors, afternoon design reviews, evening walks with Beverly whenever his schedule allowed. He told himself he could maintain both worlds without compromise, but success demanded attention. Flights began replacing quiet dinners. Messages sent during meetings replaced real conversations. Nolan promised himself each busy week would be temporary, yet another project always followed. Beverly noticed the shift before he did. "You look tired," she said one afternoon as they crossed the lobby together. "Just a busy season," he replied, offering a reassuring smile. For Nolan, ambition had always felt natural, a rhythm he understood better than rest. Yet the more his company grew, the less time he had for the calm moments that once defined their connection. At first, the missed plans felt minor: a lunch rescheduled because of an unexpected meeting, a phone call cut short by a client request. Beverly didn't complain, she simply adjusted her expectations. One evening, she waited at a cafe they both loved, a warm cup of tea growing cold in front of her. Nolan arrived nearly an hour late, his expression apologetic. "I lost track of time," he said, setting his phone face down on the table. She studied him gently. "You always say that." He reached for her hand. "I'm trying." "I know," she replied softly. They talked about her latest design project, about a new art exhibit she wanted to visit together. Nolan listened, but part of his attention remained tethered to incoming notifications he hadn't checked yet. When they left the cafe, Beverly's steps felt slower than usual. "I miss when conversations didn't feel rushed," she admitted. He didn't know how to respond without sounding defensive. The tension between ambition and presence became impossible to ignore one rainy evening when Beverly reserved a small table at a restaurant overlooking the river. She arrived early, choosing a quiet corner where they could talk without interruption. The waiter refilled her glass twice while she watched the entrance, expecting Nolan to appear any moment. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. When he finally walked in, shoulders tense from a long day, guilt crossed his face immediately. "I'm so sorry," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. The meeting ran longer than expected. Beverly smiled politely, but her eyes looked tired. "I ordered for you," she said. They began eating, conversation moving cautiously between them. Halfway through dinner, she set her fork down. "What if I just want us?" she asked gently, "not the empire." The question wasn't an accusation. It was honest, vulnerable. Nolan looked at her, searching for the right answer. Every response felt incomplete. "I'm building something that matters," he said finally. "And we don't?" she replied quietly. The words lingered between them, long after the waiter cleared their plates. After that evening, their conversations carried a subtle heaviness. Beverly didn't demand change, yet her silence said enough. Nolan tried to make adjustments, shorter meetings, earlier flights, but the momentum of his company felt unstoppable. He told himself he was working toward a future where they could both relax, where success would create freedom. Beverly saw things differently. One afternoon, she met him outside the office building as he prepared to leave for another trip. "How long this time?" she asked. 4 days, he replied. She nodded, then reached into her bag and handed him a small sketch, a quiet landscape filled with soft colors. "For when you need to slow down," she said. He tucked it into his briefcase, promising to call when he landed. During the flight, he stared at the drawing longer than he expected. It reminded him of evenings they had spent walking together, conversations that felt effortless. Yet even then, he opened his laptop and returned to work. Weeks turned into months, and the balance between ambition and presence grew harder to maintain. Nolan noticed how Beverly stopped suggesting plans as often. She focused more on her own creative projects, finding fulfillment in work that didn't demand constant travel. One evening, he returned from a trip earlier than planned and surprised her at her studio. She greeted him warmly, but there was a new steadiness in her posture, a sense that she had learned to stand alone. "You're back sooner than expected," she said. "I wanted to see you," he replied. They walked through the studio, together, stopping in front of a series of paintings she had recently completed. "You've been busy," he said. "So have you," she answered gently. He hesitated before asking, "Are we okay?" She looked at him for a long moment before responding. We're trying, she said, but trying and being present aren't always the same thing. Her honesty felt heavier than any argument could have been. A few nights later, they sat together in a quiet corner of the park where they had once spent so many peaceful evenings. The air felt warmer now, filled with distant laughter and the hum of city life. Beverly leaned back on the bench, watching the lights flicker on one by one. I don't need perfection, she said softly. I just need to know I matter as much as everything else you're building. Nolan turned toward her, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. You do matter, he said. But do I come first? She asked gently. The question lingered longer than he expected. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise her that nothing would come between them. Yet part of him knew he wasn't ready to let go of the momentum he had spent years creating. Silence settled between them, not hostile but heavy. Beverly didn't press further. She simply watched the sky darken, her expression thoughtful. In that quiet moment, Nolan realized ambition had begun to shape his life in ways he hadn't fully understood, pulling him forward even when he wanted to stay still. And though neither of them said it aloud, the space between them had grown wider than either had intended. The choice that once felt impossible was moving closer, carried not by a single dramatic moment, but by a series of small absences that slowly changed everything. 3 years after Nolan's confession had changed everything, he found himself walking toward the same small diner where he and Beverly had once shared an accidental evening that felt effortless. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The place looked almost unchanged. Warm lights, quiet music, the familiar smell of coffee drifting through the room. A booth near the window sat empty, waiting. Beverly arrived a few minutes later, her steps calm, her expression steady. She greeted him with a gentle smile that held more understanding than expectation. Hi, she said. Hi, he replied, standing briefly before they both sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence didn't feel awkward. It felt careful, as if both of them understood the importance of what needed to be said. I thought it made sense to meet here, Nolan admitted. It's where things started to change. Beverly glanced around the diner, her eyes soft with memory. I remember. The waiter took their order and left them alone again. Nolan rested his hands on the table, trying to steady his thoughts. He had made countless business decisions in his life, quick, confident choices that shaped entire industries. This conversation felt heavier than any of them. I've been thinking a lot, Nolan began, his voice quiet but firm. About us, about what you've been asking for, and what I've been able to give. Beverly listened without interrupting, her posture open. I don't want you to spend your life waiting for me to slow down, he continued. You deserve a calm kind of happiness, something steady. Her gaze held his, searching for something beneath his words. That sounds like you're saying goodbye, she said gently. He hesitated, then nodded. I don't want to hold you back. The words felt heavy in the air. Nolan believed he was making a selfless choice, stepping aside so she could build a life without constant disappointment. Beverly folded her hands together, considering him carefully. You think you're protecting me, she said softly. I am, he replied. She shook her head slightly, not in anger but in quiet understanding. Sometimes protection is just fear dressed differently, she said. Her words didn't sound accusing. They sounded sad. The diner grew busier around them, yet their table felt untouched by the noise. Do you still care about me? Beverly asked. More than anything, Nolan answered without hesitation. Then why does this feel like you're leaving before the story finishes? She asked. He didn't know how to respond without exposing the uncertainty he had been carrying for months. I don't know how to be the person you need right now, he admitted finally. And I don't want to promise something I can't give. Beverly's eyes softened. I never asked you to be perfect, she said. I just asked you to stay. The simplicity of her words hit him harder than any argument could have. Nolan looked down at the table, realizing how deeply ambition had shaped his decisions. I thought letting you go would make your life easier, he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment before replying. Maybe it will, she whispered, but that doesn't mean it won't hurt. They finished their meal slowly, conversation shifting to lighter topics, shared memories, small jokes that felt like echoes of a time when everything had been simpler. When the bill arrived, Nolan reached for it automatically, but Beverly placed her hand over his for a brief second. Thank you, she said, for being honest, even when it's hard. He nodded, unsure what else to say. Outside, the evening air felt cool and still. They stood near the entrance, neither of them rushing to leave. So this is it? She asked quietly. I think it has to be, he replied. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him in a gentle embrace. It wasn't desperate or dramatic, just warm and real. I hope you find what you're chasing, she said softly. And I hope you find the calm you deserve, he answered, They pulled away slowly, holding each other's gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then Beverly turned and walked down the street, her steps steady. Nolan watched until she disappeared around the corner. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Nolan buried himself in work, convincing himself he had made the right decision. Investors praised his focus. Projects moved forward faster than ever. Yet small reminders of Beverly lingered. A sketch tucked inside a drawer, a cafe they used to visit, a song that played unexpectedly during a late drive home. He told himself he had chosen what was best for both of them. Still, the absence felt heavier than he anticipated. One evening, as he stood alone in his apartment overlooking the city lights, Nolan realized something he hadn't expected. Letting go hadn't brought relief. It had brought silence. And that silence stayed with him long after the diner lights faded, marking the end of a chapter that neither of them had ended with anger, only with the quiet ache of two people who loved each other but chose different paths, or how one unexpected moment, far in the future, would bring their stories back together in a way he never could have predicted. The years after the diner goodbye moved quickly for Nolan Casper. Casper and Company expanded into new markets, partnerships multiplied, and his name appeared in business magazines more often than he could keep track of. From the outside, everything looked perfect. He traveled constantly. Conferences, investor meetings, award ceremonies that blurred together under bright lights and polite applause. People congratulated him on building something remarkable, calling him disciplined, visionary, unstoppable. Yet quiet moments felt different. Late at night in hotel rooms, he sometimes opened his laptop with the intention of working, only to find himself staring at an empty screen. The silence felt louder than the busiest boardroom. He told himself he had chosen this path willingly. He reminded himself that success required sacrifice. Still, there were evenings when he caught himself wondering how Beverly was, whether she still walked through the park at sunset or found new places that made her feel at home. He never reached out. Not because he didn't care, but because he believed stepping back had been the right thing to do. One afternoon, Nolan stood backstage at an industry gala, adjusting his tie while assistants moved quickly around him. "You're up in 5 minutes," someone said. He nodded, rehearsing the speech he had given in different forms countless times. Gratitude, vision, growth. The words came easily. They always did. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience applauded warmly. Cameras flashed. He delivered his message with calm confidence, speaking about innovation and resilience. But as the applause faded, he felt an unexpected emptiness settle in. After the event, a colleague approached him with a wide smile. "You've built something incredible." Nolan thanked him politely, yet the compliment felt distant. Later that evening, he returned to his apartment and loosened his tie, letting the quiet of the room replace the noise of celebration. On a shelf near the window sat a small sketch, Beverly's drawing of 2 overlapping circles. He had kept it without thinking, carrying it through every move and renovation. He picked it up, tracing the lines with his finger. Collaboration, connection, balance. Concepts that once felt simple now felt far away. Across the city, Beverly built a different kind of life, one that moved at a steadier pace. She continued working in design, eventually opening a small studio that reflected her personal style. Sunlight filled the space during the afternoons, casting warm tones across canvases and unfinished projects. Friends described her as calm and focused, someone who had learned to stand firmly in her own rhythm. Sheila remained part of her life as well. The two women rebuilt their friendship slowly, meeting for coffee, sharing updates about work and personal growth. "You look happy," Sheila told her one afternoon. "I'm learning to be," Beverly replied with a soft smile. There were challenges along the way, moments that tested her strength and forced her to adapt to unexpected changes, yet she faced them quietly, building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's pace. She rarely spoke about Nolan, not because she had forgotten him, but because she had learned how to carry memories without letting them define her present. 3 years passed like this. Nolan chasing momentum, Beverly building something grounded, their lives moving in separate directions without crossing paths. One morning, Nolan reviewed a list of upcoming charity events his company supported. He paused when he saw the name of a small park fundraiser dedicated to community arts programs. Something about it felt familiar, though he couldn't immediately explain why. "Add it to my schedule," he told his assistant. A few days later, he arrived at the event expecting another routine appearance. A few speeches, polite conversations, a brief walk through the crowd before heading to his next meeting. He didn't know that this simple decision would bring him face to face with the chapter he thought had ended. As he stepped onto the grass and listened to the distant laughter of children, a quiet sense of anticipation settled over him. He wasn't sure what he was about to find, only that something, or someone, was about to change everything he thought he had left behind. The charity park felt alive with movement, children running between activity tables, volunteers arranging art supplies, soft music drifting through the open space. Nolan adjusted the sleeve of his jacket as he greeted a few familiar faces, offering polite smiles that came automatically after years of public events. He expected nothing unusual. Then he heard laughter, light, genuine, unmistakably familiar. His gaze followed the sound across the grass. Beverly knelt near a blanket covered in crayons and paper crowns, helping a small child adjust a ribbon that kept slipping from her hair. Two boys circled her, one holding a tiny kite, while the other chased a bright foam ball rolling toward the walkway. Nolan stopped mid-step. For a moment, the rest of the park faded into the background. Beverly stood, brushing her hands together before turning, and their eyes met. Recognition crossed her face first, followed by a calm smile. "Hi, Nolan," she said gently. The years between them felt suddenly fragile, like pages that could be turned back with a single breath. "Hi," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. The children looked up curiously. "Mom," one of them said, tugging at her sleeve. "Who's that?" "Mom." The words settled heavily in Nolan's chest. Beverly gestured toward the children with a soft warmth that felt natural to her. "This is Wilder," she said, resting a hand on the shoulder of the tallest boy. "And this is Amias and Renly," Beverly added, as the smallest girl stepped forward with shy curiosity. Renly held a paper flower she had made at one of the activity tables. She studied Nolan for a moment before offering him a small smile that felt unexpectedly disarming. "These are yours?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Life surprised me too." Her tone carried no drama, only acceptance. The children returned to their games, laughter filling the air again. Nolan watched as Beverly tied a shoelace and brushed dirt from a tiny sleeve with practiced ease. He had imagined seeing her again many times over the years, rehearsed conversations, quiet apologies, but none of those imagined moments had prepared him for this reality. She looked happy, not in a distant way, but in a grounded, peaceful way that made him question everything he thought he understood about the past. They walked a few steps away from the crowd while keeping the children in sight. The grass felt soft beneath Nolan's shoes, the warm breeze carrying the faint scent of lemonade and fresh paint from the art tables. "I wasn't sure you'd come today," Beverly said. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But something told me I should." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes instincts know more than plans." He studied her expression, searching for signs of resentment or hesitation. Instead, he found calm strength, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "How have you been?" he asked. "Busy," she replied, glancing toward the children. "In ways I never expected." Nolan nodded slowly. "You seem grounded." "I learned how to be," she said gently. The simplicity of her answer left him unsure what to say next. He wanted to ask about everything, the years apart, the choices they had made, the life she had built without him, but he hesitated, not wanting to rush into questions that felt too personal too quickly. Instead, he watched as Wilder called for her from across the grass. "I'll be right there," she said, raising a hand to reassure him. When she turned back toward Nolan, her eyes held warmth, but also boundaries he respected instinctively. They sat together on a wooden bench near the edge of the park while the triplets played nearby. Renly carefully arranged painted stones in a small circle while Amias watched her quietly, offering suggestions only when she asked. Wilder chased a bright ribbon that fluttered in the breeze. Nolan leaned forward, resting his hands together. "I thought about reaching out so many times," he admitted. "I just didn't know if you'd want to hear from me." "I needed time," Beverly said. "Not to forget, but to grow into someone stronger." Her honesty felt steady, not emotional. "Are you happy?" he asked. She followed his gaze toward the children before answering. "Yes," she said simply, "in ways I never imagined." The absence of resentment in her voice surprised him more than anything else. "I was wrong to leave," he said quietly. She didn't rush to reassure him or argue. "Maybe," she replied, "but sometimes distance teaches people what they couldn't see before." Her words settled into the quiet between them. Nolan realized he wasn't just seeing the woman he had once loved. He was meeting someone new, shaped by experiences he had never witnessed, and he wondered whether there was still space for him in her life, or if his role had already passed. Renly ran toward them suddenly, holding up a drawing filled with bright colors. "Look what I made," she said proudly. Beverly laughed softly, kneeling to admire it. Nolan watched the interaction carefully, the way Beverly listened fully, the way the children trusted her without hesitation. It felt like watching a life built on presence, something he had struggled to understand before. If you've ever wondered what happens when two people meet again after years apart, when choices made in the name of love come back in unexpected ways, stay with us. Because this moment in the park is only the beginning of what Nolan is about to learn. And if this story makes you reflect on someone you once let go of, take a second to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps stories like this continue. stories about growth, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to face the past. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the grass, Nolan realized the reunion wasn't just a coincidence, it was an invitation. An invitation to listen, to understand, and maybe, if Beverly allowed it, to learn how to stay in a life he had once walked away from. The noise of the park softened as the afternoon moved toward evening. Families gathered their things, volunteers folded tables, and the sky shifted into warm shades of gold. Nolan and Beverly remained on the bench, while the triplets chased bubbles drifting through the air. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, shaped by years of shared history. "I wasn't sure how this moment would feel," Nolan admitted quietly. "And how does it feel now?" Beverly asked. "Unexpected," he said, "but right." She watched the children for a moment before answering. "I didn't come here thinking about the past," she said gently. "I came because the kids love painting outside." He nodded, understanding that her life had grown beyond the memories they once shared. "I'm not here to change anything," he added. "I just wanted to see you." Beverly studied him carefully, as if measuring the sincerity behind his words. "That matters," she said. Her tone held calm acceptance, not hesitation, and that alone gave Nolan hope that conversation between them could move forward without reopening old wounds. They walked slowly along the path as the children moved ahead, chasing a volunteer handing out balloons. "I used to think I needed to prove something after we ended," Beverly said, her voice thoughtful, "that I could rebuild everything from scratch." "And did you?" Nolan asked. She smiled faintly. "I rebuilt myself more than anything else." He glanced at her, noticing the steadiness in her posture, the quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. "I'm glad you're happy," he said. "I worked hard to be," she replied. "Happiness didn't just appear. It came from learning how to trust my own pace." Nolan absorbed her words carefully. She wasn't speaking about the past with regret. She was speaking from experience. "I never blamed you," she added after a moment, "but I needed distance to understand who I was without us." The honesty felt grounding rather than heavy. As they approached the main path, a familiar voice called out from behind them. "Well, this is a reunion I didn't expect." Nolan turned to see Sheila walking toward them, her smile warm and genuine. She greeted Beverly first, pulling her into a quick hug before turning toward Nolan. "It's been a while," she said. "It has," he replied. There was no tension in her tone, only a quiet understanding shaped by time. "I see you've met the Chaos Crew," Sheila joked, glancing at the triplets as they raced past. "They're incredible," Nolan said sincerely. "I'm glad you're here," she told him. "Just remember, Beverly's stronger now. Strong doesn't mean she doesn't feel things." Her words carried weight, not as a warning, but as a reminder. "I won't forget that," he promised. She nodded, satisfied, before turning back to Beverly. "I'm grabbing coffee later. Text me if you're free." Beverly agreed with a smile, and for a moment Nolan felt relieved seeing the friendship between them restored. Proof that time had healed more than he expected. As the park began to empty, Nolan helped gather a few art supplies scattered near the bench while Beverly called the children together. "Say goodbye to the volunteers," she reminded them gently. Wilder waved enthusiastically, Amias offered a quiet thank you, and Renly clutched her paper flower as if it were a treasure. When they returned, Beverly turned toward Nolan. "Thank you for today," she said. "I should be thanking you," he replied. "You didn't have to talk to me." She considered that for a moment before answering. "Maybe some conversations just wait until people are ready." Her words felt like an invitation, not a promise, but a possibility. "If you're comfortable," he said carefully. "I'd like to see you again. No pressure, just talk." Beverly glanced at the children, then back at him. "We can take it slowly," she said. "That's the only way I know how to do this now." He nodded, relief mixing with gratitude. As they walked toward the exit together, Nolan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not certainty, but hope shaped by patience. The reunion had begun with surprise. Now it moved forward with honesty, quiet understanding, and the careful steps of people learning how to reconnect without rushing past the lessons time had given them. Nolan didn't rush back into Beverly's life after the reunion. He respected the rhythm she had built, mornings shaped by school drop-offs, afternoons filled with creative work, evenings centered around the children's routines. Their first meeting after the park was simple, a small neighborhood cafe, warm light spilling across wooden tables while the triplets shared a single slice of cake. Wilder asked endless questions about Nolan's work, curiosity lighting up his face. "So you're the boss of everything?" he asked. Nolan laughed softly. "Not everything, just part of it." Amias listened quietly, studying Nolan with thoughtful eyes, while Renly focused on arranging sugar packets into tiny towers. Beverly watched the interaction carefully, her posture relaxed but attentive. "They're still deciding if they trust you," she said gently. "That makes sense," Nolan replied. "Trust should take time." He meant it. When the afternoon ended, he didn't linger or push for more. He simply said goodbye, promising to see them again when Beverly felt ready. That patience spoke louder than any grand gesture. Over the following weeks, Nolan became a quiet presence in their world. He helped carry grocery bags, joined weekend walks through the park, and sat at the kitchen table while the triplets colored pages filled with bright animals and crooked stars. The apartment felt alive with small sounds, laughter, the hum of music from Beverly's studio corner, the soft scratch of crayons against paper. One evening, Wilder challenged Nolan to assemble a wooden toy shelf that arrived in too many pieces. "This looks harder than running a company," Nolan joked, kneeling on the floor surrounded by screws and instructions. Beverly laughed from the couch. "Real life usually is." Amias handed him the right tool without being asked, and Renly placed stickers on each shelf as if decorating it made the process official. When the shelf finally stood upright, slightly crooked but sturdy, the children cheered. Nolan leaned back against the wall, smiling in a way he rarely did during business meetings. He realized something important in that moment. Success didn't always look impressive. Sometimes it looked like a toy shelf built slowly with 4 small helpers offering advice. One afternoon, Beverly invited Nolan to her studio while the children attended an art class nearby. Sunlight filled the room, reflecting off canvases arranged neatly along the walls. "You don't have to come every time," she said gently. "I don't want you to feel obligated. I'm here because I want to be," he replied. She studied him for a moment, searching for signs of the old restlessness she once knew. Instead, she saw someone learning how to slow down. "I've noticed you leave your phone in your pocket more," she said. He smiled faintly. "I started setting boundaries at work. That's new," she teased softly. They walked through the studio together, discussing her latest projects. Nolan listened carefully, asking questions not as a businessman evaluating ideas, but as someone genuinely curious about her world. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. "It took time," she replied, "and a lot of learning how to trust myself." Her words reminded him of the years they had spent apart, years that had shaped both of them in different ways. As Nolan spent more time with the triplets, he began to understand their individual personalities more deeply. Wilder's curiosity filled every conversation with new questions. Amias preferred quiet observation, often sitting beside Nolan during puzzles or drawing sessions. Renly's shy smiles grew more frequent, especially when Nolan read stories aloud in soft voices that made her giggle. One evening, while Beverly prepared dinner, Nolan sat at the table helping the children with homework. "This one's tricky," Wilder said, pointing at a math problem. Nolan leaned closer, guiding him through the steps patiently. From the kitchen, Beverly watched the scene unfold. She saw how naturally Nolan adapted to the rhythm of their life, not trying to take control, not trying to impress anyone, just being present. After the children went to bed, she joined him on the balcony. "You're different," she said quietly. "I'm trying to be better," he answered. She rested her arms on the railing, looking out at the quiet street below. "Staying doesn't always mean big promises," she said. "Sometimes it means showing up for ordinary days." He nodded. "I'm learning that." For Nolan, the biggest change wasn't a dramatic decision or a grand declaration. It was the quiet realization that presence required patience, that being part of Beverly's life meant embracing the small, everyday moments he once overlooked. And as he watched the lights flicker on in nearby windows, he understood something he hadn't known before. Staying wasn't a single choice. It was a series of small actions repeated again and again until they became a way of living. The apartment felt unusually calm once the triplets drifted into sleep. Soft lamplight filled the living room, reflecting off scattered drawings left on the table. Outside, the street moved at its usual gentle pace, distant footsteps blending with the hum of evening traffic. Beverly set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat across from Nolan, her posture thoughtful. "Today felt easy," she said. He nodded. "I like these moments." She watched him carefully, as if weighing something she had been holding back for weeks. "I've been thinking about where this is going," she admitted. Nolan felt the seriousness in her tone and leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. Beverly folded her hands together, choosing her words slowly. "If life gets complicated again, will you run?" The question didn't sound angry or accusing. It sounded honest, shaped by past experience rather than fear. Nolan didn't answer immediately. He thought about the version of himself who had once believed leaving was the right choice, the version who had placed ambition above presence because it felt logical at the time. "I can't promise perfection," he said quietly, "and I don't want to pretend I'll never make mistakes." She nodded, listening. "But I can promise that I won't disappear when things feel difficult," he continued. "I'm learning what staying actually means." Beverly searched his face, looking for hesitation. Instead, she saw sincerity, a steadiness she hadn't seen before. Silence settled between them for a moment, gentle rather than heavy. "I don't need perfect answers," she said. "I just need honesty. That's all I can give, he replied. She leaned back against the couch, letting out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. 3 years ago, I felt like I was waiting for you to choose between your life and me, she said softly. Now I don't want to be chosen over anything. I just want to walk beside someone who's willing to stay present. Nolan absorbed her words carefully. I don't see this as a choice between worlds anymore, he said. I see it as building something that includes both of us, without losing what matters. Her expression softened at that. After a long pause, Beverly reached for his hand, not urgently, just naturally. Then we move slowly, she said. No rushing, no pretending the past didn't happen. He nodded. Slow feels right. They sat together quietly, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The conversation didn't end with dramatic declarations or perfect resolutions. Instead, it created a new kind of understanding, one built on honesty, patience, and the willingness to face uncertainty together. For Nolan, the moment felt like a turning point, not because everything had been solved, but because he had answered the question that mattered most, not with promises meant to impress, but with truth shaped by everything he had learned. And as the evening settled into peaceful silence, both of them understood that what came next wouldn't be defined by grand gestures. It would be defined by consistency, by small choices made every day, and by the quiet courage to keep showing up, even when life asked difficult questions again. Spring returned with warmer air and longer evenings, bringing a sense of renewal that felt gentle rather than overwhelming. Beverly invited Nolan to a small lakeside gathering. Nothing formal, just close friends sharing food and laughter beneath strings of soft lights. The triplets ran along the edge of the water, their reflections flickering across the surface as they chased each other in wide circles. Wilder attempted to skip stones, Amias watched quietly while offering thoughtful advice, and Renly collected small flowers she insisted on turning into bracelets. Nolan stood beside Beverly near a wooden table, watching the children with a quiet smile. This feels different from the events I'm used to, he said. That's why I like it, she replied. No expectations, just people being themselves. The atmosphere felt relaxed, shaped by easy conversations and soft music drifting through the evening air. Sheila arrived a little later, greeting Beverly with a warm hug before turning to Nolan with an amused smile. I never thought I'd see you assembling paper lanterns, she joked, nodding toward the decorations he had been helping hang. I'm learning new skills, he replied, laughing softly. She watched him for a moment, then glanced toward Beverly and the children playing near the water. You look calmer, Sheila said quietly. I feel calmer, he admitted. She nodded approvingly. That's good. Just remember, building something steady takes more patience than building a company. Her words carried warmth, not warning. As the evening continued, Sheila joined the children in a game of tag, her laughter blending easily with theirs. Seeing her comfortable around Beverly again reminded Nolan how much time had softened old wounds. What once felt impossible now looked natural, friendship restored through understanding rather than forgetting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, tiny lights began to flicker above the grass. Fireflies drifted slowly through the air, drawing delighted whispers from the children. Nolan and Beverly stepped away from the group for a moment, walking toward the quiet edge of the lake. The water reflected the last colors of sunset, creating a peaceful stillness around them. I've been thinking, Nolan said, his voice low. She turned toward him, waiting. I don't want to go back to what we were before, he continued. I want something steadier, something built on everything we've learned. Beverly watched the fireflies move between them, her expression thoughtful. Are you asking if we try again? She asked softly. Yes, he replied, but slowly, without pressure. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for his hand, letting their fingers rest together while she considered the moment. We try, she said at last. The words felt simple, yet they carried the weight of trust rebuilt piece by piece. They returned to the gathering just as Wilder ran toward them holding a glowing jar filled with tiny lights. Look what we caught, he said proudly. Beverly knelt to admire it while Nolan laughed, helping Amias secure the lid carefully so the insects wouldn't escape too quickly. Renly slipped her hand into Nolan's, guiding him back toward the table where dessert waited. The scene felt ordinary, yet meaningful, a life shaped not by grand gestures but by shared moments that grew naturally over time. Later, as friends began saying their goodbyes, Nolan stood beside Beverly watching the children grow, sleepy beneath the soft glow of lanterns. Thank you for tonight, he said. She smiled gently. Thank you for staying. The words carried more meaning than they needed to explain. As they walked back toward the car together, Nolan realized love didn't always return with dramatic declarations or sudden changes. Sometimes it returned quietly, through laughter, patience, and the willingness to rebuild something stronger than before. And in the soft light of that lakeside evening, their story turned toward a new chapter, one defined not by the past they had lost, but by the future they were choosing to create together. Over the next year, Nolan's life began to change in ways that surprised even him. Instead of chasing every new opportunity, he started reshaping Casper and Company into something more balanced. He delegated responsibilities he once held tightly, trusting his team to lead projects without his constant presence. Meetings became shorter, travel less frequent, and evenings slowly opened up in ways they never had before. Colleagues noticed the shift. "You seem different lately," one executive said during a strategy session. "I'm learning what matters outside the boardroom," Nolan replied with a small smile. The company continued to grow, but the pace felt steadier. For the first time in years, success no longer meant sacrificing every quiet moment. Beverly's creative studio flourished alongside these changes. Sunlight filled the space each morning as she worked on projects that blended design with storytelling, often inspired by the small moments she experienced with the children. The triplets spent afternoons drawing at a long table near the window, turning scraps of paper into colorful masterpieces. Nolan occasionally stopped by after work, offering feedback when asked, but mostly enjoying the calm atmosphere she had created. "You've built something beautiful here," he told her one afternoon. She laughed softly. "It's still growing, just like us." Their partnership felt natural, two people supporting each other's goals without losing their own identities. Life settled into a rhythm shaped by everyday moments rather than dramatic milestones. Breakfasts became a shared ritual, Wilder asking endless questions about science, Amias carefully arranging his cereal pieces into neat patterns, and Renly leaning against Beverly while humming softly to herself. One evening, Nolan walked into the kitchen to find crayons scattered across the table, the children deeply focused on creating a birthday card for Sheila. "You chase the world," Beverly teased gently as she leaned against him, "and it led you back to a kitchen full of crayons." He smiled, watching Renly hold up a drawing filled with bright colors. "Best place I've ever arrived," he said. The simplicity of the moment felt more meaningful than any award he had ever received. As time passed, Nolan began speaking at small gatherings for young entrepreneurs, sharing what he had learned about balance and presence. During one talk, a student asked, "What's the most important decision you've ever made?" He paused before answering. "Learning how to stay," he said. "Success doesn't mean much if you're never fully present for the people who matter." His words weren't rehearsed. They came from experience, from years spent chasing momentum and the quiet realization that fulfillment lived in ordinary moments. After the event, he returned home to find Beverly and the triplets waiting with a simple dinner and laughter that filled the room. Years later, their home felt warm with memories. Photographs lining the walls, shelves filled with art projects, soft music drifting through open windows. Wilder, Amias, and Renly grew surrounded by patience and encouragement, learning that love wasn't measured by grand gestures but by consistency. One evening, as fireflies flickered outside the balcony, Nolan sat beside Beverly watching the children play. "Do you ever think about how everything started?" he asked. She nodded gently. "Sometimes. But I think more about how we chose to move forward." He slipped his hand into hers, grateful for the journey that had brought them back together. Their story had never been about dramatic rescues or perfect timing. It had been about choices, about learning from mistakes, rebuilding trust, and discovering that real happiness often arrives in the quietest ways. And as laughter filled the room once more, Nolan understood something he wished he had known years earlier. Love isn't defined by the moments you chase. It's defined by the moments you choose to stay. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone, or of a moment you wish you could live a little differently, take a second to support the journey. Leave a like so more people can find stories that feel honest and real. And share your thoughts in the comments because every perspective adds something meaningful here. And if you believe love grows through patience, presence, and second chances, subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories. There are many more stories waiting, and the next one might feel even closer to home.